A couple of days ago, I did a video called Three Ways Immigration and the Making of America. And in that video, I noticed something interesting. When you look back through the history of the United States, some of the largest periods of immigration seem to fall into these three waves. The first is the late part of the 1700s and early part of the 1800s. The late part of the 1800s and the early part of the 1900s. And then the third one is the late 1900s and the early 2000s, roughly 100 years apart. Now, like I said in that video, this isn't a perfect clock. And I'm not claiming that every 100 years somebody flips a switch and suddenly millions of immigrants start showing up. But there does seem to be a pattern. After I finished that video, another question started bothering me. Why? Why did America experience these periods of increased immigration when it did? Was it simply coincidence? Was America just a place people wanted to come to? Or was something else happening inside of America that was creating a need for more people? More specifically, more workers, more laborers. Because when you start looking at the history of this country, something else seems to change right alongside immigration: the labor needs of America. The United States of 1790 didn't need the same kind of workforce that it did in the 1880s, 1890s. And the United States of 1890s didn't need the same kind of workforce that it did in the 1990s. And the same for today. The country changed, the economy changed, industry changed, and technology changed. And the workers of America needed changing along with it. So that's what we're going to look at today. Not whether immigration is good, not whether immigration is bad. And I'm not trying to blame people who came here looking for a better way of life or for whatever reason. I'm just asking questions. As America changed, did its need for labor help influence immigration? And if it did, who needed these laborers, these workers? Who benefited from these workers? And how much influence did government, industry, corporations, and other powers that shaped the country have over who came here, when they came here, and what kind of workers America was looking for? We're going to start out right after the American Revolution, and then follow that question all the way to technological America we're living in today. Because maybe those immigration waves were only about people looking for America. Maybe sometimes America was looking for them. So we'll go back to the beginning. The Revolutionary War is over. The United States is now an independent country. But being independent and actually becoming a functioning nation are two different things. In 1790, the first census counted about 3.9 million people living in the United States. That's not a lot of people when you think about everything this country was trying to become. The government had to function, the economy had to grow, money had to be made, towns had to expand, farms had to produce enough food. Ports had to move goods, roads and homes had to be built, tools had to be made, ships had to be loaded and unloaded. And all that required labor. At this point, America wasn't looking for computer engineers, it was looking for workers, laborers. And America needed people who could do the basic work of building a country: farmers, carpenters, blacksmiths, masons, dock workers, merchants, craftsmen, and laborers. People who could take land, resources, and opportunity and turn them into something useful. And between the end of the Revolutionary War and the 1820s, roughly 500,000 Europeans arrived in the United States. And again, compared to what would happen later, this doesn't sound like a huge number. But when the entire country has only had a few million people, a few 100,000 new arrivals mattered between life and death. Now, this is where I start asking questions. Did America officially sit down and sit there and say, we need this many farmers, this many carpenters, and so forth, and this many laborers? Probably not. But the needs of the country create an environment that encouraged immigration. I think that's worth looking at. because this new country had something much of the old world did not: room, opportunity, land, ports, natural resources, and a growing economy that needed people willing to work. So you have people on one side of the Atlantic looking for opportunity, and on the other side of the Atlantic, you have a country that needed populations and labor. These two things fit together pretty well. The United States also had relatively open immigration policies compared with what would come later. There was no modern immigration offices, no green cards, no complicated quota system, and like the ones that would eventually be created. The country needed people, and people came. Now, does that prove labor needs caused immigration? Maybe. There is plenty of reasons people came to America: opportunity, land, religion, family, political freedom, and economic hardships back home. But the point is that people arrived were entering a country that had a use for them. The country was growing, the economy was expanding. Almost every part of that growth required human labor. So already, right after independence, we can see the beginning of a connection I'm looking for: the need of labor. Immigration wasn't just about adding people to a population, it was adding workers to a country that desperately needed workers. And as America moved deeper into the 1800s, that need began to change. The eastern United States was growing, cities were expanding, transportation was improving, manufacturing was beginning to increase. And America was slowly moving from simply establishing itself to building something much, much bigger. By the 1820s and 1830s, America wasn't just trying to establish itself anymore. It was growing, and growth created another problem. You had to connect everything. Cities along the East Coast were getting larger, ports were getting busier, commerce was increasing, and more goods was being produced and moved from one place to another. Roads weren't enough anymore. Canals were being dug, railroads were beginning to appear, factories and mills were becoming a larger part of the economy. And every one of them things required workers. Someone had to dig the canals, lay the tracks, work the docks, build the cities, operate the mills, and manufacture the goods. And once again, immigrants were arriving at the same time America needed more labor. During the 1840s and 1850s, immigration increased dramatically, particularly from Ireland and the German states, excuse me. Now, obviously, these people had their own reasons for leaving home. That's famine, political unrest, economic hardships, and the hope of finding something better. But America also had a reason to welcome labor. There was work to be done, and there was money to be made. That's part of the equation I keep coming back to. People needed opportunity, business needed workers. The country needed infrastructure, and the economy needed growth. Maybe nobody had sat down in a room and planned the whole thing, or maybe they did. Maybe they didn't have to, because when the needs of the immigrant and the needs of the economy lined up, the result could happen naturally. But did it? But the bigger America became, the more labor it required. And by the middle of the 1800s, the United States was becoming something very different from a small country that existed right after the Revolution. Then came the Civil War, and for 4 years or more, everything changed. But when the war ended, America was about to begin another enormous transformation. Reconstruction, railroads, Western settlement, mining, farming, new towns, and new industries, and just growth. And an enormous amount of land was waiting to be developed. America was about to move west, and once again, somebody was going to have to do the work. And there's a lot of work to do. The Civil War has ended, but the country has been torn apart. Cities, farms, railroads, and infrastructures have been damaged or destroyed, particularly through the South. Reconstruction wasn't just political, there was physical reconstruction. There was economic reconstruction, And at the same time America was rebuilding, it was also healing and expanding. The country was moving west, and think about what that required. Railroads had to cross enormous distances, tracks had to be laid, bridges had to be built, tunnels had to be dug, coal had to be mined, timber had to be cut, iron and eventually steel had to be produced. Mines were operating, farms and ranches were expanding, new towns were appearing. And once again, all this required people, lots of people. But here's where something begins changing. This wasn't simply about building a country anymore. There was serious money involved. Railroad companies wanted workers, mining companies wanted workers, farmers and ranchers needed workers, construction needed workers, and businesses needed customers. The government had its own reasons for wanting the country developed and populated. So, once again, you have different interests that all needed basically the same thing, people. And the immigrants became part of that workforce. Chinese immigrants became particularly important in building Western railroads. European immigrants wanted worked in mines and agriculture and construction railroads and the growing towns and cities. People came from different countries for different reasons and ended up becoming part of the workforce that was physically expanding the American economy. But here's something else worth thinking about. These workers weren't just producing something for themselves, their labor was creating wealth. Railroads, mining, land, and agriculture all created fortunes for somebody or some people. Entire industries were being built as America expanded westward. So when we talk about the need for immigrant labor, maybe we should ask another question. Who actually needed cheap, easy labor? Was it America? Was it the government? Was it the corporations? Was it the wealthy investors financing the expansion? Or was it all of them? Once again, the needs seem to line up. Immigrants needed job and opportunity. Businesses needed labor. Government wanted development. Investors wanted returns. And America wanted expansion. Maybe that happened naturally. Maybe some of it was encouraged. Maybe some of it was deliberately planned. Probably a little bit of all of that. But whatever the reason, people moved west. Railroads followed, towns grew, industries expanded, and money was made. And by the late 1800s, something else was happening. America wasn't simply expanding across the continent anymore. The industrializing factories were getting larger. Cities were getting bigger, and so were the corporations. And the amount of labor they required was getting bigger. Westward expansion that helped build a continental economy. Industrialization is about to turn that economy into a machine. And that machine needed workers. Again, the common denominator. And workers came. By the late 1800s and early 1900s, the United States was transforming into an industrial powerhouse. Factories were everywhere, steel mills were expanding, coal mines were producing the fuel that helped power the country, and railroads connected cities, factories, mines, farms, and ports. Construction was booming, cities were growing at a pace America has never experienced before. And all this required one thing: labor. Again, not hundreds of workers, not thousands, but millions. And right about the same time American industry developed enormous appetite for labor, one of the largest immigration waves in American history was taking place. Between 1890 and 1919 alone, 18 million immigrants entered the United States. People arrived from Italy, Poland, Russia, Austria, Hungary, Greece, and other parts of Europe. Many of them ended up exactly where America's growing economy needed workers. Factories, mines, steel mills, railroads, construction sites, and slaughterhouse and ports. And the rapidly expanding cities surrounded them. Now, again, I'm not saying millions of immigrants came to America because somebody ordered them to come here. people had their own reasons for leaving their countries. But once again, look at what was happening on the American side when they got here. Industry needed workers, corporations needed workers, factories needed workers, and people who owned those factories needed something else: profit. The more products they could manufacture, the more products they could sell, but to produce more, they needed more labor. And the large available workforce was also gave employees something extremely valuable: competition for jobs. If 10 people are competing for one job, the person offering that job has a lot more power than if 10 companies is competing for one worker. So that kept the labor cost down, made it easier. And that's when this starts getting interesting to me, because now immigrants isn't simply about having enough people to build America. We're talking about labor as a supply. It's the supply of labor itself. How many workers were available? What were those workers willing to do? And how much does somebody have to pay them? Those questions affect money and wages. They also affect profits, and they affect power. So when this enormous immigration wave simply coincides, that happened at exactly the same time American industry needed millions of workers, slaves, maybe, or the American economy itself was acting like a giant magnet. Jobs were here, money was here, opportunity was here, and corporations had every reason to want workers here. Again, that doesn't mean that one person sitting behind the desk controlled everything, but it does mean the interest lines up. Immigrants wanted opportunity, industry wanted labor, corporations wanted production, investors wanted profit, and the government wanted a growing economy. Then, as America moved through to the 20th century, something else began to change again. Machines became more advanced, manufacturing became more efficient, education and science became more important, and eventually computers began changing almost everything. America still needed workers, but increasingly it wasn't asking how many workers can we get, it was beginning to ask what kind of workers do we need. And that brings us to technological America. And that question changes everything. What kind of workers do we need? Because as America moved through the 20th century, the economy again was changing. Factories still mattered, construction still mattered, agriculture still mattered. America still needed millions of people doing the physical work that kept the country running. But increasingly, another kind of labor was being more important: knowledge, scientists, engineers, doctors, researchers, and mathematicians, and eventually computer programs and technology specialists. America wasn't simply competing over who could manufacture the most steel or build the most factories anymore. It was increasingly competing over who could develop the next technology, and that required a different kind of worker. By the second half of the 20th century, American universities, research institutions, hospitals, engineering companies, and eventually technology corporations were attracting people from all over the world. Then came the computer revolution: personal computer, the internet, software, and telecommunications. By the end of the 1990s, American technology industry was exploding. Companies didn't need simply more workers, they needed workers with specific skills: computer science, engineering, mathematics, medical, and research, and specialized technological knowledge. And this is where the immigration became more interesting, because now America had immigration programs that could actually help bring in particular kinds of workers. Not just anybody willing to work, but people with specific skills employers said they needed. And once again, that asks the same question we've been asking throughout this entire video: who needed these workers, and who benefited from these workers, and who had the influence to tell the government what kind of workers were needed? Technology companies needed engineers, hospitals needed doctors and medical professionals, The university wanted researchers and students. Corporations needed scientists and specialists. All of them had one interest in having access to talent from outside the United States. Now bring that forward to today. Artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and robotics, cybersecurity, advanced computing, biotechnology. These industries simply don't require workers, laborers. They require highly specialized workers. And sometimes there maybe only a few limited numbers of these people in the world who have exactly the knowledge a company or industry is looking for. So the competition begins again. 100 years ago, a corporation might have needed 10,000 people to work in a factory. Today, a technology company needs a much smaller number of people who possess a very specific skill or knowledge. And that brings us right back to immigration. If the workers you need aren't already here, what do? You can train them, or you can wait for the next generation to develop these skills, or you can bring them here. And once again, I'm not saying every immigrant coming to America is part of that giant labor plan. Obviously not. People still come for family, opportunity, safety, education, and hundreds of other reasons. And America still needs workers in agriculture, construction, manufacturing, hospitality, transportation, and other industries. But something has changed. The system has become more capable of being much more selective about certain kinds of labor. Again, that's what I find interesting. At the beginning of the story, America needed people to help build a country. Then it needed workers to expand the country. Industrial America needed millions of people to feed the machine. But technological America increasingly needs something different. It needs knowledge, it needs skills, and it needs talent. And there's still money to be made, a lot of money. So maybe the labor needs never disappeared. Maybe they just evolved. And maybe immigration evolved right along with them. So what does all this tell us? Maybe nothing. Maybe these different periods of immigration simply happen to line up with the changing labor needs of America. That's a whole lot of things lining up. After the Revolution, America needed people to help build a new economy. As Eastern United States grew, it needed workers to build roads, canals, railroads, towns, ports, and factories. After the Civil War, America needed people to rebuild, expand westward, work the mines, the railroads, develop the land, and create new towns and industries. Then came industrialization. Factories needed millions of workers, and millions of immigrants came. Then the economy changed again. Technology didn't necessarily need millions of people doing the same job. It needed particular people with particular knowledge and particular skills. And immigration changed along with it. Does that prove somebody planned all this? Yes. No. Maybe. But I don't think we should ignore the correlation either. Because throughout this entire story, the same thing keeps appearing. Labor, money, industry, government, corporation, opportunity, and power. The immigrant might be the person we see coming into the country. Maybe the immigrant isn't really the important part of the story. Maybe the more important questions are who needed them, who benefited from them, who made the money, and who had enough influence to shape the policies that determined who would come. Maybe sometimes it was simply supply and demand. Maybe sometimes the government encouraged it. Maybe the corporations and industry influence. And maybe sometimes all those interests just simply happen to line up. I don't know. But I think there's enough enough of a pattern to at least ask the questions. And labor is only one part of this. Because the more I look at these immigration waves, the more I wonder what other forces may have been influenced them. We've looked at the timing and we've looked at the labor, but there's another part of American history that seems to overlap with some of these same periods. And that's what I'm going to go with the part 3. But if what we've looked at here is even partially connected, then the next correlation raises an entirely new set of questions. Maybe these immigrants weren't random. Maybe they weren't planned, or maybe they were. Maybe America simply changed and immigration changed with it. But who influenced these changes? Who benefited from them? And what else was happening at the same time? And that's where we're going to go next. Until then, guys, question everything. Later, taters.
Attention passengers, we've now reached our destination. We hope you enjoyed the flight and have a nice day.